Hello, Charles. Welcome. I appreciate you coming here and spending the time to tell us about your story on the podcast, The Workers Gripe. We're trying to have an episode out every week, and we appreciate you and telling us about your experience. And this is our first time, so I welcome you. And if you were here in person, we would have offered you a beverage, like a coffee or a tea. But
Or water. Water's really good for you, I hear.
yeah, it's very hot in here. But I understand you're very busy, so I appreciate the time you have saved for us. So, could we get into a little bit about your story?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation. So for those who don't know, my name is Charles Brown. I am a UE project organizer. And the UE, by the way, stands for the United Electrical Radio Machine Workers of America. We're working to establish local unions here in the 757, specifically in Virginia Beach and Newport News. And have been going strong for over a year and a half now.
And I understand you've done a lot of work, and I do apologize. Matthew and I meant to introduce ourselves, actually. Matthew and I are members of the Virginia Beach Coalition. We're also members of the Tidewater Workers Assembly, the Southern Workers Assembly, and the Tidewater DSA. So we're just saying hello and shout out to everyone.
We have our fingers in all kinds of pies.
Yeah, but
Same here.
they gotta be gluten-free. I'm just saying. Some of us are trying to lose weight.
I was thinking pizza pies.
Of course you were. But back to a little bit more, like, of the work you've been doing for years, and also, like, I understand you had a story for us, like, as a worker yourself, working at a certain location. Can you tell us more about that?
Are you talking about with Walmart?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I worked at Walmart from 2010 to 2017, and while there, it was we've tried to unionize. The first time we tried to unionize was actually in 2012, at least when I was there, and the efforts fell through. And then 2 years later, in 2014, some representatives from another union called United Food and Commercial Workers of America, they came and they were organizing Black Friday protests under the Our Walmart banner, which was an organization that was, trying to help workers, organize for $15 an hour in a union.
Sure.
And again, this was in the early 2010s. So 2014, I helped stage a walkout. My store, along with several others, I was at the Newport News one on Jefferson Avenue by the airport. Anyway, long story short, it ended up being one of those fights where Walmart did give everyone a raise, across the board, and they did it incrementally for the following 3 years. So this was in 2014. So for 2015, 16, 17, I believe it was $9, $10, and then $11 finally, consecutively. And I believe to this day they're still at the minimum of 11. So yeah, we helped get that started. But that was my real first foray into the whole labor movement, and as far as the fight for 15 and workers' rights. So really seeing, going against a Goliath like Walmart at the time, I'm sure younger listeners are probably thinking, Walmart, because Amazon is the major conglomerate now. But yes, for those listening who may not be aware, Walmart was the king, and really still is one of the main competitors, even on the global stage to this day.
Yeah, that is true. And I mean, for some of our listeners who've never understood, there are sweat factories out over in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world that make our clothing, and they install suicide nets, don't they, Matthew?
The suicide nets were at
Yeah, but
that was at an Apple factory.
yeah, but
actually.
Walmart does carry all types of things. You've
Yeah.
got the mines too, where they basically are forcing people to mine certain heavy metals to death. All for the sake of technology. So, Charles, I appreciate your fight.
Tune in weekly for more content like this.
Well, I mean, we're talking about the truth right now. And Charles,
I
like
agree.
you say, you were at the Newport News location for that span of years. I mean, what type of abuses did you experience as a worker?
Well, I'm really the type of person where I'm not going to tolerate but so much anyway. So
Hmm.
I was fortunate, right? I was really fortunate. And, at the time I was working a second job. For those who don't know, I was substitute teaching as well.
Hmm.
So I was really of the mindset, um, I'm only going to tolerate but so much. I mean, I had a physically grueling job. I was actually one of the unloaders. So we were the people who, when trucks came into the store, we unloaded the freight by hand. Sometimes with
Mm.
machine, but mostly by hand. And a lot of times, you're on these time schedules, sometimes very unrealistic. They may expect, for people who's listening, if you've ever worked in a warehouse or if you've ever done unloading, they'll know what I'm talking about. So with freight, there's it's a system where they call it boxes by the hour. Some places call it time multiplied by freight. So you may have a truck that has, 3,000 pieces or how many pieces on that truck, and they have these calculations where how as far as what the time frame of completion should be, not always taking into account how many bodies or how many workers on hand.
Hmm.
So a lot of times we, experience abuses in that front, especially, when they would, have us on the staff or wouldn't necessarily give us all the tools needed. You would have conflicts and within that foray. But my main thing, and I think workers need to understand, is regardless of what abuse is, it's really knowing your rights, knowing the handbook left and right, and knowing it to where, they may try to abuse you, but I was one of the workers who really was in the handbook and knew the policy better than a lot of managers did. So while they may have wanted to get over abuse me, again, maybe it's just my personality type, but they weren't able to do it to me. But I did witness them do it to some other workers who may not have been as knowledgeable or, quite frankly, as astute, if you will, to assert their rights. So that was always an issue. I think, yeah, the main thing is knowing your rights. And that way, if they do come to you with something that's, not right, you're able to combat it and really nip it in the bud right there and then. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, right? I know that's kind of a roundabout answer, but to answer your question, I wasn't really that subject because, again, I made sure I didn't even let it get past a certain point. So that's just how I operate. So does that answer the question or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does, and
Okay.
I understand there are a lot of workers experiencing like the what is it, the quota, as you may, like wearing out their bodies like you had for a while. And Matthew had experienced something like that at Dollar Tree.
I don't know. I didn't work for Dollar Tree very often. I worked in the Dollar Tree warehouse for a little while. I also worked at a Walmart as a stalker. I think they called it customer availability program. But we
Yeah, cat team. So you had
yeah.
cat teams 1 and 2.
Yeah, I was cap 2. So we would unload the grocery truck and then we would, load the groceries onto the shelves. It was not a ton of fun. I was not very good at it.
Talk about the fact that it was wearing out your back. You had already gotten an injury in the past.
Yeah, I already have a really messed up back, and it got to the point where my back was just aching every day, and I just stopped. I started missing shifts, and then I had missed enough shifts that I wasn't able to go back anymore.
And you were being paid what at that time period?
I think it was $11 an hour.
And then you see,
And Dollar Tree warehouse was only $10 an hour.
wow. So you would just
And
alternate.
Dollar Tree had a ridiculous quota.
What was your
It
quota?
was, I don't know what the numbers were. Just it was not achievable for me. And I don't know if most people fabricated their numbers, but a lot of people fudged their numbers.
And that's kind of like why we're here right now. We're starting a podcast. This is our very first episode here at the Gather location in Town Center, Virginia Beach. We're trying to collect the stories. We want to empower our workers to remind them that even though these things are going on, they do have some strength inside of them. And when we come together, we win, don't we, Matthew?
That's right.
But going ahead, are there other types of work you've ever experienced, Charles, where, you see other people maybe missing hours off of their timesheet?
Oh, that was actually that brings to mind something from the Dollar
Oh.
Tree warehouse. they kind of encouraged us to be on time or even clock in early to get to the meeting, the pre-shift meeting. And then there was that, so everyone was basically would be on time or clock in a little bit early so they could get to the meeting because there was only one terminal to clock in at. So everyone had to line up at the one terminal, like 50, I don't know, 100 people lined up, clocking in, and then so you had to be there early, and then sometimes you'd leave a couple minutes late, but they'd always just round your time down to 40 hours.
Really?
Yeah.
So you weren't even being paid for the work you did?
Not entirely.
Not entire wage stuff.
Yeah.
That gets my goat every time. You know, when I was 16 years old, one of my very first jobs was actually at a farm fresh myself. And I remember my manager basically wanted me to not clock in. She wanted me to start work without clocking in. I looked over her as a teenager, and I said, I know my rights. I'm not going to work before I clock in. It's not going to happen. And I just remember her looking at me dazed, like she couldn't understand that I knew that I had some form of rights as a worker.
I remember when I worked at Kroger and I was working in the dairy department, and the department manager had quit like right before I got hired, so I didn't have a direct manager. But the grocery manager heavily implied to me that if I couldn't get the job done in the allotted time, that I should find a way to get it done. And then sometime later, I realized that the actual union, the head of the union for that particular store, would work off the clock to get his work done.
Really?
Yes.
And this is at Kroger?
Yeah.
Okay. See, that concerns me too, because as workers, as workers now, and wanting to fight for basic decencies like paid sick leave, masks, sanitation for whatever you're doing, right? But I'm starting to hear reports around Hampton Roads anyway. They're trying to get rid of the workers that they call troublemakers. But some of them are holding on, and I'm proud of them. I mean, a lot is at stake, right, Charles?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think every workplace always has that. And I think, especially within the retail industry, you really see that in large scale, right? Whether it's even not just really anything customer service related, but especially in retail, whether it's fast food or grocery retailers where people know that their rights are being violated and they say something. And, the reality is the boss, it's in their interest to squash dissent, if you will. So it's just something that we always have to be cognizant of and aware of. And to what Matt was referring to as far as the hours, yeah, they did that at Walmart as well when I was there, as far as trying to make sure that you stayed under 40. And really, that's pretty much, for the most part, a lot of companies' SOP, right? Their standard operating procedure almost, because that keeps them from having to pay overtime, under the fair labor, under the NLRB, the National Labor Review Board, and the Fair Labor and Wages Standards Act, right? So they do a lot of these practices. They'll make you work off the clock or clock in a certain way and then clock out a certain way, but then ask you to do them a favor or things of that nature so that they can skirt, have to pay that overtime. So, it's something that needs to be addressed across the board, especially being that, Virginia is a right to work state. And this isn't to say that it doesn't happen in states where they don't have right to work, but where there is right to work, employers tend to feel a little bit more emboldened, if you will. Even though right to work doesn't really give you the right to do that. Right to work just means that you cannot be forced or compelled to join a union or to stay with a job. If it's at will, then, you can leave at any point, just like they can, depending on the set they're working in. Because depending on the set they're working in, they can't just let you go. But, that's going into a whole nother set of issues. So, yeah.
So what are the prospects for the PRO Act? I know a lot of labor organizing groups are looking into pushing that. How
Well,
do you,
I would no, go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. Okay,
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
just I was just going to ask, like, do you see it actually passing, and how would it benefit workers here in Hampton Roads?
I mean, it would benefit workers tremendously, but right now, if we're being frank, it really depends on. Uh, I believe her name is Chris Cinema
Mm-hmm.
out of Arizona, and Joe Manchin from West Virginia, and they've been the main holdouts as far as I know. So really, I think it's really dependent on those two, if we're being honest. And personally, I don't consider them progressives whatsoever. I really don't even consider them Democrats. So,
True.
um, being positive, I think it could,
Uh,
but right now, if it's being that it's really resting on their shoulders, the prospects aren't looking good. But it doesn't mean, hey, I've been surprised before. But right now, my biggest concern, to be quite frank, isn't even really what it passed. And I think it's more so what it may end up looking like if they do decide, whatever compromise they decide on. That's really more so my concern, because anyone who knows the legislative process, be it on the federal or the state level, there's always compromise when it comes to these bills with legislation, because it goes into committee, then comes out of committee, and you know, bills almost never come out, as far as if they are passed, they're almost never passed the way that they were initially proposed, right? So
yeah.
my concern is more so, even if it does pass, that it ends up being a watered down, toothless version of itself that's unenforceable. Especially again with the current, in my opinion, lackluster makeup of the Senate, because and I know this is getting more into the politics side, but just from my point of view, right, and I consider myself fit, pretty far left for the most part. I don't really think we have many labor allies in the U.S. Senate. So again, it doesn't mean that it can't pass. My concern again is what it would even look like in the event that it does.
Yeah, that
But
is.
to answer your question, and I think I kind of did, but as far as what it would look like for workers, I would hope, and if it were to pass in its current form, it would allow workers to automatically, be able to join the union. I mean, which they can, but I think, based on the way it's written, it would take off, or it would reduce a lot of the current pitfalls that currently exist, that make it very difficult for unions and other labor organizations to organize, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way the bill is currently written, it alleviates that. But again, like I said before, my concern is what it will look like once it goes into committee. And my understanding right now is that it's still sitting, right? Like it
Yeah.
hasn't, like it was passed in the House, but it hasn't really gone anywhere in the Senate. So yeah, to answer your question, I would hope that if it passes in its current form, that we'll have robust protections for workers on really, if it passes, that's a federal law. So
Yeah,
for
it is.
example, here in Virginia, it would make the whole issue of having to repeal right to work almost a null and void issue, because it would almost, under its current iteration, it would automatically do away with that the way that is currently written, at least as far as I understand it in its current form.
Yeah, we did try in the past, didn't we? We tried to change our state constitution. We weren't very successful, were we? You think,
Well,
Matthew?
yeah, unfortunately, and again, those watching, because I'm sure this podcast is not just going to be Virginia; it's going to be everywhere,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So,
definitely. And
I'm sure
we're
there's folks watching or who will be listening to this who may not live in Virginia, who may not have been following the news. So, for those who are listening who may not live in Virginia, be up on the most current events in the Commonwealth. Last year, the government, well, the seats of power changed. So the state Senate is still controlled by the Democratic Party by one vote, but the House of Delegates and the executive branch, which of course the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general, have all switched over to the Republican Party. And so
mm-hmm.
what Steph was referring to as far as the Constitution amendment, yeah, back in the 2020 in 2021
Hmm.
sessions. I believe it was the 2021 General Assembly session where they had proposed several constitutional amendments to, well, actually, the repeal right to work one. I don't believe that actually ever went through. It was proposed, but I don't think it ever actually got voted on. They did have one of the constitutional amendments that was voted on and that did pass, and it would have had to have gone up for another vote this year, was the one to repeal, that would make it where returning citizens or, people who've done time and, who've been incarcerated would be able to vote. But I actually don't
Certainly.
think any of the labor bills actually made it that far. They were proposed, but I believe they had all died in committee, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't even think it was proposed, but it never actually made it to the point where it would have even came up to a vote this year. But if anyone listening, feel free to fact check me on that.
Yes.
But yeah, my understanding is I don't even think any of the labor bills that were proposed last year, specifically with repealing right to work. Matter of fact, I believe Sam Razul and it's another gentleman who was in the and I cannot remember his name, but he ran for lieutenant governor last year and he lost his seat. But anyway, there were a few legislators who did try to propose such bills, but I don't believe they went anywhere.
We are heading in that direction, though. I think a lot of people are just tired. I mean, COVID has been basically taking bites of our local Hampton Roads community for a very long time. So I kind of see the workers getting what they need: collective bargaining rights, paid sick leave. I have hope for our future, Charles.
Yeah. Oh, most definitely.
Yeah, I think we're heading in that way. And Matthew said you wanted to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna point out that we're issue oriented and not partisan here.
Most
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. So we're for the workers, 100%.
Why are you laughing?
So I
Well,
kind
at
of
We're
the
feel
end
gonna
of
have
the
to
day,
edit that out.
yeah. No,
so
keep
no,
it in.
so no, and I'm glad you brought that up because we need to, be clear about this. The reality is, if we're being honest, the Democrats aren't necessarily our friends on this issue either, right? And that goes back to
No.
what I was saying about, and this goes back to what I was saying about Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. Just because people have a D next to their name doesn't necessarily make them an ally in the labor movement. In fact, some of the um, folks who were most opposed, who really opposed some of the labor amendments and the bills that came up, were Democrats. So I think we do need to be clear on that, right? Because I think there's an assumption, especially with the one of the two major political parties in this country pretty much going, you know, far left as far as most people who consider themselves progressive are concerned. Really, if you're progressive in this country, I would argue that we really don't have a party that really represents us. I mean,
Right.
True.
just being frank, the Democrats are
Yes.
probably the closest, and they really don't represent the issues of labor. I mean, they really, and again, we are nonpartisan, but I think we need to be very clear that we really are not beholden to either interest because the truth is both parties are working for the interests of the oligarchs, right? As far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned.
absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think that needs to be clarified because we don't want to give the impression that we are in the hands of the Democrats. Although I'm pretty sure most people who are watching, who will be listening, who are favorable to what it is we're talking about, probably would lean that direction. Please know that the people that you're voting for, depending on where you live, especially if you live in more rural areas,
Hmm.
probably are not the most supportive. And and actually, I know I'm kind of segueing, and I apologize if I'm, going off script. Feel free to, stop me. But I think
No, go
really, if
ahead.
anyone listening, anyone that's listening, if you do live in more rural parts of the state or anywhere you live, right? Because I mean, we know just from a partisan divide, um, rural areas, throughout the country tend to be more conservative, tend to be more red,
Yeah,
and the urban
generally.
areas tend to be more democratic. So really,
Yes.
the people who are listening, if you do live in those more conservative areas and you do have, a working relationship or, even a cordial relationship with your lawmakers, be it be it on the state or the federal level, really push them, right?
Yes,
And
most
as well
definitely.
as as well as folks in cities. But in the cities, it's definitely going to be pushed. But definitely in those rural areas, especially if you have these blue dog Democrats. But again, I feel like I'm kind of getting carried away, so I definitely want to, I don't want to usurp your program.
Oh no, we love it, love it, love it, love it. I just want to tell all the listeners out there that we're nonpartisan. I'm just piggybacking off of what Charles and Matthew said, but we love y'all. We're just here for the workers, and you need to lean on every one of those lawmakers, including your city council. All those races matter. Come out there, say to them. They have their home offices. Maybe carpool if you need to. Matthew, stop rushing the mic. Anyway, carpool if you need to. Go talk to them. Tell them, this impacts your family. I mean, it's really sad that 1 out of 10 workers here in Virginia Beach itself cannot raise a family here. So you're booting out. You're booting them out.
Yes, and
Can
the lawmaker
you,
I was thinking of, I had to look his name up. It's Lee Carter. He's no longer in the state legislature, but he was one of the main champions as far as a lot of labor legislation around labor. But he was more so in the Northern Virginia area, or really more so around, I guess, like Fredericksburg area, like sort of central VA.
So I know we touched on the issue of collective bargaining at some point here, but could you
Mhm.
tell us more about the fight for collective bargaining for Virginia Beach city workers?
Yes, please. Since you've been leading that fight.
Can you
you're
repeat
champion
that?
here.
Oh, sorry. On my end, it okay. Yeah. Can you tell us more about the fight for collective bargaining for Virginia Beach city workers?
Our
Yeah,
champion,
yeah.
Charles. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Charles.
most definitely. So, the fight started back in 2020, right, when the sanitation workers went on strike. Well, specifically those who work for the waste management department of Virginia Beach. And when they went on strike, we reached out and started making contacts with other workers throughout the city departments, and we started meeting with them. And kind of, and I definitely need to rewind, because actually it didn't start there. Really, the reason we're even able to fight the way we are, right, is because during the 2020 General Assembly session, they passed a law that went into effect May of 2021 that allows any municipal government, be it city, county, whatever, to vote on collective bargaining, but it has to be done through the city council or the county commissioners, depending on where you're at. So they have to pass it, and once the local government decides to pass it, then yeah, they can allow their public employees the ability to collectively bargain. So that's sort of that gives the backdrop to why and how we're able to operate in the manner in which we operate. So for those who've been able to follow the news as far as what's going down the city council, we've actually, again, been fighting since, I would say, September, October of 2020. And it's a long, grueling process because, again, it's all about politics at this point. I mean, yes, the workers' power is crucial.
Yeah.
And, we're working, we're fighting several battles, two main ones simultaneously, and that is raising the consciousness of the workers that we're dealing with. Because let's face it, we were just talking about, the politics as far as us not really being, us leaning on Democrats who aren't really Democrats, right? And I think one thing we have to acknowledge is that as a country, we've really shifted to the right, over the past, since the Reagan era. And I know I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I think it's really important just really frame the context of the landscape within which we're working, right? So a lot of these workers and a lot of people in general have misconceptions of what a union is, how unions operate, whether they even can operate. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people think it's illegal. There's a whole bunch of misconceptions that still exist. So on one end, we're constantly educating and, re-educating workers on that. And then on the other end, you have these politicians, right? These city council members who, for whatever reason, whether they have interests, which is totally against what we're doing, because there's people who don't want to see collective bargaining because, it affects their bottom line one way or the other. Because let's face it, this is coming out of, this is all coming down to city budgets. This is all coming down to how resources are allocated. And the reality is, and I'm speaking specifically for Virginia Beach at this point, but really for most cities, right? I mean, this area of Virginia is a resort area. Virginia Beach is one of the highest grossing resort areas, cities in the country. and really even in the world. I mean, it's one of the top destinations to go to as far as for beaches and tourism and whatnot. So they generate a lot of revenue. And I say all that to say that Virginia Beach is not strapped for cash. They are not broke or in dire straits in terms of finances, which is one of the things that they may try to, you'll sometimes hear these politicians, talk about budgets and where's the money going to come from. But they get millions of dollars in tax revenue, not to mention, we're not even talking about the CARES Act or the money that's come from the federal government since the pandemic. Just on a regular basis, they, as a municipality, they're getting millions of dollars. And a lot of times they'll use it for stadiums or other projects, and yet they'll fail, or I don't even say fail, they deliberately, neglect the workers who keep the city running. So to go back to the process, as far as how collective bargaining works, it comes down to, each city government, and then again, in this case with Virginia Beach, there's 11 council members, the mayor included,
Yeah.
and we need 6 votes. So anybody that's listening, if you live in the city of Virginia Beach, definitely reach out to your council members and really hone in on that, especially ones who are right wing, who are really more so against what it is we're doing, right? And really sounding the alarm. And, we may even have to change some seats at some point, and that's what it's looking like. But we have uphill battle. But yeah, just to kind of go back, bringing it 360. The reason we're even able to do this is because of the law that passed in 2020. And then what really sparked it off was the waste management strike that took place in late 2020 as well.
So I'm just going to city council, like the last city council meeting, the city council members seemed like they were appreciative, but the one before that, they were kind of silent, right? You had sanitation workers and supporters and allies going up to the microphone, and then you had them just mocking ruefully the livelihoods, the suffering of their own city's sanitation workers. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
I think you might be mixing up the two. So, because I know in Virginia Beach, so, because we got this, so it's just for folks listening, we're also working with Newport News city workers, right?
Yeah.
So, and Virginia Beach, the mayor has pretty much been, like, the first time we went, he didn't even acknowledge us.
Exactly.
And
that's what I'm
none of the other council members even spoke up, didn't even acknowledge us, at least, not on the, not during the council meeting, right? During the second time we went, which was last week, a couple of them, I believe Sabrina Wooten came out and talked to us.
She did.
A couple of the workers, and I believe Aaron Rouse had spoke to some other folks down the hall. But for the most part, none of them acknowledged us during the council meeting. Now, in Newport News, they did acknowledge us.
Yes,
Each
they
council
did.
member in Newport News did acknowledge us and did give, at least they gave, they gave the presumption that they're at least looking at it, which we, to this point, have not gotten in the city of Virginia Beach.
Right.
So, I mean, when Sabrina Wooten came out to talk to us, also, sorry, I'm reminded, this first episode, guys, bear with us, I gotta bring the mic closer to my mouth, but under my understanding, she told us there was nothing to do, like, everybody came to the table, and under my understanding, you can bring many things to the table during the session, during the year. So,
I'm
what is
not
true?
sure. Who are you referring to? I'm sorry.
Sabrina Wooten.
Correct.
Yes,
Yeah. I mean, the reality is, it can always be reintroduced. I mean, any measure that's introduced can always be brought back up, even if it, gets voted down. I've looked at the state statute, and as far as I know, there's nothing that would preclude them from voting on it again, even if they decided not, even if they voted down. I think the issue is about morale, right? We don't want to.
Yeah.
I mean, we really don't want to put folks in a position where, we go forward and the measure fails. So we're in a very tricky spot right now.
Yeah, I understand, and we need 6 votes, if I'm clear on that. So,
Yes.
come on, workers, come out and reach to your city council members. Tell them how important it is that we keep Virginia Beach families in Virginia Beach.
I think that's a great place for us to leave off. It's a rallying cry.
Thank you, Matthew. To all the listeners, Charles, thank you so much for being here with us. We're going to edit it, and I'm going to post on many places. What are places, Matthew?
Good question. We'll have to figure that out.
Facebook, VB Coalition.
YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube, Facebook.
VBcoalition.org.
And the new one, Detox Virginia Beach. And it will be on the Facebooks, Virginia Beach Coalition, Tidewater, Workers Assembly, Southern Workers Assembly, Tidewater, DSA. It's going to be all there, all the other places. So just check us out. And hopefully you come for next. And actually, before we close, Matthew, Charles, would you be willing to come for a part 2 to elaborate a little bit more about our victories?
So elaborate a little bit more on what?
About
Our the victories, our impending victory.
Yes.
Oh yeah, sure.
All right.
So we got a commitment for next Monday. So
Well, I don't know about next Monday, but we'll
okay.
definitely, definitely meet up
figure
again.
it.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out off the air, quote unquote.
Yeah, we'll play it by ears. Sorry. Thank you, Charles.
All right. Thanks, Charles.
All right, see you guys.
Thank you.
Thank
All right,
you.
everyone.
Peace out.
Bye bye.